This is why I'm never camping in the deep woods again. I'm going to be sharing with you several eyewitness encounters submitted to me by viewers just like you. This first incident took place to Russell in 1985 in the late fall, possibly around August to October. They know it was a Saturday, but they can't recall the exact date. Now, it was during Russell's summer vacation from school before the beginning of the fall semester. They were 15 at the time and had been enjoying some hiking and camping in a forested area behind their home. They had practically lived in the woods and, as they got older, still spent a lot of time hiking, camping, spelunking. They had seen bears and wolves and deer, moose, as well as other various wildlife. But what they saw was something that they had never seen prior or after. It was getting dusk by this point, and they had just finished making a lean-to and laid out their sleeping bag and pad. They have had a fire ring from stones and would sometimes clunk them together and would think they had heard this delayed echo. They did not pay much attention to it, however, but later on, they saw a pair of deer wandering past, looking at Russell with a mixture of caution and confusion and curiosity. They hung for a couple of minutes and then left, and he also had a fox stare at him for a bit while he was unpacking his cooler and hot dogs. So he tossed the fox a hot dog and went back to staring to break up some limbs for a campfire. They had been working on making a pile for that night for maybe 10 or so minutes when he had heard some rustling. He thought it was the fox getting a bit closer, but it was long gone, actually trotting away pretty quickly from the sounds of it, of something bigger. At this point, he's thinking, okay, maybe a coyote or possibly a black bear, so he lights the fire early to help deter any approachers, and then keeps working on gathering more wood. He breaks one and hears a clunk, like a baseball bat hitting a tree. Okay, that is weird. Breaks another limb, this time sounding much closer. They had a good stash of wood now, so Russell had worked his way back to camp, thinking, okay, someone is just messing with me. And so now Russell has his camp axe, a machete, and a pocket knife, and he had never needed more, so as a kid, having a gun for him was a no-no, but he was wishing for anything, as he was thinking that some nutty man was trying to scare him off or worse. Now at this time, it was about 1985, and Bigfoot was a thing for the areas of the Pacific Northwest forest, not the woods of central New York. So he had carried his dragged load of limbs and small logs back. Some were too big to fit into the fire without hanging out, so he began to break them down again, and once more the ka-thunk happened. But this time, it was close enough that it echoed off the trees and the rock face that he had used to form the site of his camp. He began scanning the area around him. Now, about 30 to 40 feet away from the camp was part of an old stone wall from the 1750s and was still in considerably good shape. It was still about 4 feet tall and roughly 36 inches wide. At the time, Russell was 6 foot, and while he could get over it, it would not be with ease. Another reason he had chose the area is it had the wall as kind of a barrier for animals. At least they could not get over it without making more noise. That would be important later on. Now, it was getting toward dusk, and the sun was beginning to set in the sky, casting shadows into the whole area that was already dim from the tall trees and thick leaves. So it took Russell several times to notice that the shadow along one tree on the far side of the wall was getting larger every time he looked away. The problem was that with the sunlight, it should be thinner and not thicker, and should have been going away from, not toward his camp. He had saw no movement and heard nothing, yet any time he looked in any other direction, it appeared to get closer. Russell had a pretty good flashlight, but his concern was, if he used it, would it charge him, whatever it was? And since it seemed to think that he was still unaware, so he waited. He sat down, nervous and wishing he was back inside of his house. Then he remembers that he never told his father where he was going to camp. Just the vagueness of going in the woods, and cell phones did not exist at this time, so he was on his own. Between 8 to 10 miles from the closest road or house, in a section of woods not one bothered with unless it was hunting season. His stomach was rumbling, so while still keeping an eye on the shadow, he started to roast a few hot dogs. He had some granola bars with him as well, and thought at least if Mr. Shadow was hungry, which had not moved for maybe 20 or so minutes, he opened it up and slowly walked over to the wall. When about 15 feet away, he lobbed the granola bar, and he laughed out loud when it actually landed on top of the wall. So he works his way back to the fire, sat and ate and had a soda even, and it was now nearly dark by this point. and the shadow had now merged into the dark of the shadows of the trees. Now, since all of this started, a pretty strong wind had been blowing away from Russell. The wind now let up, and a smell like a combo of wet dog, skunk, and rotten leaves and mush all rolled in. He kind of gagged and felt this chill go down his spine. The shadow had come closer, crossed over the wall to get within 10 feet without making a single sound, and was now to the side of a big old oak tree that was at least 4 feet in trunk, but was not wide enough to fully hide the shadow. Any bravado he had left was gone, like when he tossed the granola bar. His hand was resting on his machete, but he kept thinking that whatever it was, he was just going to end up pissing it off. And it was then he hears this grunt, a sniffing noise, and it reminded him of Kong from the '77 film. There was enough light barely for him to see the granola bar that he had tossed, and it was gone. He had one left, so again, he unwraps it and tosses it, and this time away from the tree so he could see what it was that went after the bar. Now, up till this point, he had been thinking a height similar to his own of maybe around 6 feet, maybe shorter. He had built up his fire for light, which created a reddish-yellow eye shine on his visitor. Now, this had completely freaked Russell out a bit. It moved from behind the oak toward the bar, and it stood at least 6'6", covered in long brownish black hair or fur. Huge black hands hung almost below its knees, and it made nothing more than a rustling on the ground covered of leaves, pine needles and cones and dead fallen limbs and loose stones. A face that looked like a mix of a human and gorilla. A flat nose, large nostrils, a very pronounced brow ridge, and tucked in tight ears, covered in what looked like a softer type of hair found on its body. No hair on the face, which looked like thick leather, yellow-white teeth with pronounced canines, again, like a gorilla but with a flatter mouth. And its neck was so thick, as it turned, part of its body had to turn with it. The outer part of its left leg, which was facing, looked lighter in color and had almost no hair on what would be the calf area of a human. It was male from the exterior equipment, and he grabs the granola bar, ate it like it was the best thing ever, and in slow, almost comically exaggerated chewing, and now scared because of the situation he was in, being this close to a large unknown wild animal. But it was not afraid of Russell, and Russell was well aware he can make a mistake which could cause major conflict, and he of course would lose before it started. Whatever this was taller, stronger, much heavier, and all around more robust than he was. Likely, even more so than black bears in the area. So Russell sat watching, and it finishes the granola bar, looks at the fire, and grunts, guessing it's not a fan of fire. Then at him with a thanks for that look in the eyes, which Russell might have imagined as they were almost pure black. Then Russell watched it as it got up and moved back to the wall. Looking back once, he states in this crackling stutter voice that he had no more granola bars. It snorted and seemed to step over the wall without even slowing down. He went straight up the hill and side, which was covered in rock scree and dead trees, making it easy slipping terrain. But it kept going, cresting the top of the hill and went down the other side, which would then lead into a series of farms and wooded areas till it reached state parkland. Now, at this point, it was way too dark and risky to try and go home. So he was basically stuck in his campsite, knowing that whatever this was still around. Russell did not sleep that night. Well, think are more or less cat naps, while also trying to keep the fire going as bright as he could make it. Finally, daybreak the next morning, and he had his camp packed up and was heading down as fast as he could. He saw one of the tracks on the way down and realized they were from what he saw, and this thing had been following his trail all the way to the campsite, and he never heard, saw, or smelt the thing till it seems that it wanted him to know it was there. This next story begins when one night, Harris called two of his sisters to come hang out with him back in the hallway, where they were just chilling and having conversation. Harris claims that everything was normal until he sees this laser beam light cover the whole entirety of the house where they were standing. In a front of the window, inside of the porch, it had a washing machine where they were standing, and a window was on top of it, so you could look directly outside and see the front yard of the house, and the green beam circled the entirety of the house, changing the color of grass and the pavement, and then supposedly the green light turned off in 1 second, and they thought it was really weird and kept questioning themselves like, what was that? Then they went to start taking pictures, like selfies, and, the usual stuff you do when friends hang out together. And there was an alien right behind them the whole time. Now, Harris claims that it had no nose and big white eyes and sharp teeth, and it was literally standing right behind them. Harris kept asking himself what it was and that wasn't there originally. How come it never did anything to us, but it was still dangerous? The skin appeared camouflage, the same color as the hallway that they were standing in, and only the camera had picked it up. They know it was something abnormal. And this is the picture that was actually taken and sent to me personally. What do you guys think? This story is submitted to me by Liam. He used to work at the Lemp stables, half a block away from the Lemp mansion. The first night of working there, he had somebody following him up the stairs. The catwalk was lit, but the stairs weren't. And when Liam got to the lit area, the footsteps from behind him stopped, never going back down the stairs either. And he would randomly hear little girls giggling while working in an open area. And one worker even asked why they were messing around with the sound system so early in the morning. He had asked her what time did she hear them messing with it, and she told Liam around 6:30 a.m. So Liam holds up his keys and tells her that nobody was in the building to mess with the sound system, and that he saw a gentleman with a mustache and a nice gray suit walking through the work area. Now, Liam follows him down the hallway, and he didn't turn to go around the next hall, but kept walking through the wall. Liam also had a few other interesting things happen while working there. So, the very first night haunt on his first day of the job, he was briefed about what his duties were and how to work on the project. Ironically, Liam was working on constructing a haunted house attraction in a warehouse that was previously owned by the Lemp family. The warehouse was known as the stable, and is where they kept their horses to transport their beer. The stable had a total of 3 floors, which one was converted to an art loft, and the last one was converted to a ballroom. At the front side of the warehouse was an old-time elevator lift, and a set of stairs that had led to the art loft, which was attached with a catwalk that overlooked the warehouse. On Liam's first night working, he was told to turn off the lights upstairs before he had left, and the 3 other members of the crew had just finished and were packing everything up for the day. As Liam went upstairs, he looked over the warehouse floor from the catwalk area, mapping out the area in his head. At the time, he had heard footsteps coming up the old creaky wooden stairs. Now, Liam is standing roughly 20 feet from the stairs, but the area wasn't very well lit. Naturally, he had a very bright flashlight with him and began asking if they had any plans for design or structure, but whomever just came up the stairs didn't answer. So Liam asks, "Hey, did you hear me?" Yet, got no answer. At that point, the crew below asked who he was talking to. He called out all 3 of them by name, and they all answered in view of him from the floor below. He then asked them who else was in the warehouse with them. They simply said, "Nobody." And so he turns his flashlight on in the direction of the footsteps that had just followed him up the stairs, and to his surprise, nobody was there. As he walks back down the stairs, he made note of how even the softest of steps were. The steps creaked and squeaked the entire way down. Something came up the stairs with him, but did not go back down. And there was only one way somebody could have gone up and down those stairs. Now, in the early days of working in the stables, back in the 1840s, there were many horses to feed and maintain. On one such occasion, one of the family friends of the Lemps was visiting with their young daughter. The details weren't known what happened or how it happened, but one of the large draft horses had gotten out of its stall. What happened after that was truly heartbreaking, as the near 2,000-pound draft horse came sprinting down the aisle, fatally striking a younger girl. Years later, it is said that you could still hear the little girl giggling and playing in the stables like she did when she was alive. From Liam's experience, he too has been in the warehouse and would just randomly hear a girl giggling and laughing. After the project was completed, the area was turned into a small microbrewery and restaurant. And Liam once went back and ate there, but had to ask the server if they had ever heard the little girl giggling in the warehouse. Now, Liam wasn't kidding. Her face turns white, and she asked how he knew about the giggling girl. And he tells her that he used to work there many years before, and simply left it at that to this day. But even now, people still report hearing this little girl giggling in the now empty warehouse. In the wedding party, as mentioned previously, there is a ballroom on the 3rd floor. This has become an attraction to have a wedding reception at the Lemp stables. One such morning, as Liam was showing up for work, he was met at the door by a wedding planner. She had gotten in early that morning with her workers to stage the reception that was taking place that very day, and she had asked what Liam was doing there, so he tells her that he's one of the managers for the haunted attraction they had built. Her eyes widened, and she said that she thought it was great to have them trying to scare her crew with her sound system. But he told her that some of the noises on the sound system were custom made in a studio right down the road, and how they had a devil of time routing wires and speakers all throughout the warehouse. So Liam and her have a good laugh about it and asked if she had been through the haunted attraction the night before. She just shrugged and said no, and that the haunted house wasn't really her thing. At that point, Liam just stares at her blankly and asked, when did she hear the sound system and the noise effects before? She just smiles and said she had heard them this morning while they were setting up on the third floor ballroom. Liam just blinks at her pretty hard and asks about what time she had heard the noises. Like before, she claimed, around 6:30 a.m. And as soon as she had gotten there, they were loading tables and equipment into the elevator. And so Liam holds up the keys and tells her, our warehouse closed up shop at 1 a.m., and that Liam is the first person there at 9 a.m. to open the doors to the warehouse. She then laughed and said that couldn't be. They had heard them messing around with stuff for the last couple of hours. Again, Liam holds up the keys and tells her, no, and the first one here. I have these set of keys. Nobody else is here. No one's getting in unless I'm here first. Liam is also the one who has full control over the soundboard, and they get unplugged after every night, just in case of the event of a possible fire outbreak. She just looked at Liam and didn't believe him until he actually physically unlocked the doors, walking into the main office where these soundboards and control panels were located, only to see that everything was turned off, unplugged, and locked up. This is when her jaw virtually drops and her face turns white. She just abruptly left. Liam still has no idea what she had heard, and neither does she. But one thing is for sure, it wasn't anything that Liam or his crew had created or had a hand in. So one of the last things that Liam had experienced was the Mustache Man. So he claims that when you manage a haunted attraction, you have many things you have to maintain throughout the night to keep the attraction running at its best. And that means running all over, making sure lights are working, pneumatic and animatronic effects are working, and fog machines are full of fog juice. This means that after constructing over a mile of built rooms and hallways, you have to create trapdoors to quickly get from one side of the warehouse to the other. These hidden doors look just like regular walls, but people that work there know they exist in the event of a quick evacuation / lunch, smoke / bathroom break, or quicker ways to get to their rooms and scenes so they can deliver optimal scares to paying guests. The great thing is about this, everybody is given a room to work with and they can establish a character that fits the persona of that room. Some people were good at it, yet some people not so much. Before starting the night of scaring their customers, Liam would walk the entire house, check each character and how their room looked. It was a pretty enjoyable ordeal to see everybody's morbid creativity. On one such night, Liam had killed the lights, opened the doors, and guests were fed in ever so slowly so they can get their money's worth. Now, about halfway through the night, Liam went to go fill the fog machines with fog juice, and as he came out of the production office, he was all done in normal makeup, carrying 2 jugs with him. He acted the part as if he had ran into guests and dropped in out of the trap doors. If he was in a room or hallway and people were there, he would jump out and scare them, and then move to the next section. As he came into one room, he hid in the corner as he had heard a group of people approaching. The first person that entered the room was a man wearing a gray bowler hat, a barbell mustache and a gray suit, and black bow tie. He jumps out to scare him, but he didn't notice him or even look at him. Then the group came in and saw him. So Liam botched that scare, but made his way to the next room, only to see the man again. And instead of using trapdoors, Liam had followed him. Oddly, he couldn't even catch up to him, even though he was striding down the hallways very quickly. Liam's emotions were now spinning as he was trying to figure out who did he hire that showed up that didn't fit the theme or anything they had in their haunted attraction. Finally, he gives up on the chase, ducks down 2 hallways over, and begins backpedaling. Better to get ahead than try and come from behind, right? Well, wrong. As Liam goes down the paths in the opposite direction, basically walking towards him, he never ran into him. He comes upon the next scene where one of the female characters was working and asked if she saw the guy in the 1920 suit and hat, and she told Liam that she did and she yelled at him, but he didn't even look at her. Liam tells her the same thing happened to him. He had also asked where did he go, and she pointed down the hallway that he had just come from. Liam informs her that he didn't pass him and came from 2 hallways ahead of her scene, and she just looks at Liam in confusion. At this point, Liam hops on the radios and is asking if anybody had seen this guy and who he is, and the only reply he got was that he had just passed the mortuary room, which was 4 hallways away. He had to have crossed in Liam's path. The mortuary room was almost at the end of the entire attraction, and he knew that there were only 6 more rooms for him to go through, so he had to cut through their exiting hallway, which took Liam directly to the end, and then backtracked from there. There was no way this person was getting past him, and then it happened. He saw him in the hallway again, but he was walking the opposite direction to head back into the other scenes. So Liam follows him down the hallway, but he never turned. He kept walking straight. He was in full view the entire time and walked through the wall at the end of the hall. He never turned, he never slowed down, and he did not stop walking. At that point, Liam stopped in his tracks and headed back to the control room. They looked at the footage to see where he came from and where he could have gone, but in all the areas he was spotted, there was 0 video footage of him walking in the room or hallway. Now, the overnight party. It was the second to last night of production, October 30th. They had just finished for the night and were cleaning up the house and sweeping the floors, turning everything off and unplugging all electronic devices. It had been a long couple of months, and it was almost over. Sadly, it was so late that Liam didn't feel like driving almost an hour to get back home, only to turn around and come back the next day and start working on a final payroll early in the morning. So he just decided to stay the night. At this point, his watch had shown it was just past 2 in the morning, and it was now officially Halloween. Liam had realized the only comfortable place to sleep was in the coffin in the mortuary room, so he bundled himself in the coffin and tried to sleep for the night. The warehouse was pretty quiet for the most part, and then it wasn't. He began hearing footsteps upstairs in the ballroom on the 3rd floor. Even though it was the 3rd floor, the art lofts to the side of the warehouse were on the far west side, but the ballroom was directly above him in the big open part of the warehouse. The crazy part is, it wasn't just one set of footsteps, it was many sets. He could also hear music playing, like old ragtime-style music. He thought this may have been some sort of joke or prank, possibly pulled on him by his coworkers, but he got up and went to check the doors. They were locked. Nobody was getting in or out, unless he knew. The elevator was on the 1st floor and open, but powered down for the night, and the door heading up to the Grand Hall ballroom was also locked. So he goes and lays back down, lying in his coffin, and listening to what sounded like a party going on above him at just past 3 a.m. on the morning of Halloween. Knowing all the doors were locked and the external power was off, he didn't sleep for most of the night. It should have been impossible for anybody, at least that many people, to get up there. That's going to do it for tonight's episode, you guys. If you enjoyed this, please go ahead and smack that like button. Don't forget to leave a comment down below and let me know your thoughts on this video. Also, if you're new to the channel, be sure to smack that subscribe button and keep your notifications turned on so that way YouTube will let you know every time I release a great new video. Keep an open mind, guys. I love you all, and I'll see you guys in the next video.